All right. Well, welcome everyone to the traffic calming meeting for Huntingboro Trail. We are meeting virtually. It's July 30th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. So we're going to start with kind of a broader overview of the program, sort of what we do, why, things like that. Then we're going to talk about the tools, some of the options we have at our disposal for traffic calming, and then we'll zero in onto the design concept we have put together for Huntingboro and talk about some of the next steps in the program. But to get us started, we'll just answer what is traffic calming. This is a program that NDOT runs for residential streets. Um, we generally lean toward physical solutions that encourage lower speeds over significant lengths, and the primary goal is speed reduction. There are 3 E's in traffic calming. That's education, enforcement, and engineering. We can see engineering is kind of bold and underlined here because that's really what NDOT has the most control over. It's where they can really affect the design of their streets. Education certainly is helpful in a lot of scenarios. This meeting tonight is an example of some of the educating NDOT does around safety and the traffic and design of roadways. And then lastly, there's enforcement. That while we are always excited when speed limits are enforced by Metro Nashville Police, it is not something they have the resources to do constantly everywhere. So the design we're going to talk about tonight is sort of intended to slow speeds, but without the use of specific people actively enforcing speeds. Uh, the reason that speed reduction is so important as a primary goal in this program is really Vision Zero and safety. So for anyone who's not aware, Vision Zero is the concept that we can imagine a world where no one is killed or seriously injured on Nashville's roadways. And that ties into speed by this graphic below. So we can see that when a pedestrian is struck at 25 miles an hour, their chances of survival are pretty good. That's like 89% or so. That, of course, declines as speeds go up. So at 35-mile-an-hour level, you really only have like a 2/3 chance of surviving if you were to be hit by a car. And then it really tanks around 45 miles an hour, where that goes down to just 35%. All of these speeds, unfortunately, are ones that we see in neighborhoods in Nashville. So when we observe people going really fast on roads where people live and walk, we want to make sure that we do something to bring those speeds down where we can. Certainly, no measure is perfect, but we like to think that some of the things that we do on projects like these do lower the speeds that people are traveling on residential roads and therefore improve the safety of everyone around. This is a really popular program in Nashville. So off to the right is a map of all of the traffic calming projects that we've done and all of the ones that have applied. So we'll take a kind of zoomed in look at this map later in the slides, but just know that there are a lot of streets who have applied for traffic calming and not been selected, but we've also done a lot of projects over the last several years. So Huntingboro Trail is one of 25 neighborhood streets that were selected in the spring of 2024. And when y'all were selected, there were about 480 streets in that queue. So what that means is of everyone that's asked for traffic calming, we observed Huntingboro Trail to be one of those top streets that are most in need of one of these projects. So there are a few things that the traffic calming program does really well, but there are all kinds of things that are out of our wheelhouse. Sidewalks and bike lanes are kind of a perfect example of that. We're not able to do either of those things with a project like this. But should anything outside of the traffic calming program come up during our discussions, we want to make sure everyone is aware of Hub Nashville as a resource. That's an app and a website and a phone number all in one that can be used to request just about anything from Nashville's government And most of the time, they'll get back with you pretty quickly with some sort of either informational response, or a lot of times, if it's something simple like patching a pothole or fixing a broken sign, um, they'll dispatch people to go out and address that complaint. So we just wanted to make sure that that was, on everyone's mind as a reminder that this is a really good resource to use for things traffic related, but also other things, trash, debris, stormwater issues, really you name it. And there's a way to access it through Hub. Um, Speaking a little bit more about how Huntingboro Trail was chosen for traffic calming, we wanted to talk a bit about our prioritization formula and sort of where you all fit in. So when a street applies, what we do is go out and collect data about the traffic moving through your neighborhood. So that'd be vehicular speeds and volume. So volume is just another name for how many cars drove by that day. Um, those two pieces put together are the largest chunk of a prioritization score in this program. So when we see a lot of cars and or cars driving fast, that's a good indication that some traffic calming is necessary. But we also include a few other things. That'd be vulnerable user injury or fatality. So if there were any serious accidents with pedestrians or bicyclists in the last several years, we want to make sure to take that into account when we're scoring these. Non-driver accommodations, that just means, are there sidewalks or aren't there? If there aren't sidewalks, we know that when people do walk around, they're in the street. So your score actually is helped by the lack of sidewalks, and you don't get those points if there's somewhere else to walk. And then trip destinations, that's really your proximity to schools or public parks. And the reason we include that with that little 5% bump is just because we acknowledge and know that those two things are places that people like to walk to. And certainly if there are kids walking to school or people walking to the park, we want to make sure that we're providing a safe environment for people to do that. Um, Here's some data about Huntingboro Trail specifically. We measured your 85th percent speed at 42 miles an hour. So that is really fast relative to the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. Certainly, it's pretty close up to that range where if somebody was struck by a vehicle going that quickly, they would have a hard time, getting out of that interaction alive. The volume wasn't too bad, but 1,825 cars, that is quite a bit. It's certainly not the highest we've seen in this program, but it is a lot of folks moving through your street. Certainly more people than live on Huntingboro Trail, and I suspect this won't come as a big surprise to those of you that live on the street. In terms of width, it's relatively wide, so 30 feet is about 10 feet wider than that like minimum width that NDOT usually designs their street with. So we'll see in a couple of slides how that might affect some of the tools that we choose to implement or discuss at the very least. And then lastly, this is a location map for Huntingboro Trail, just to give you all some context of where this project is. So this is a zoomed in version of that map we saw earlier with all of the traffic calming projects in Nashville highlighted. And we see that Huntingboro Trail is this sort of lime green color because you all are currently in your design and meeting phase of the project. So you've been selected already, and now we're having our meeting, and then next we'll move into, finishing up the design for this project. Elsewhere on the map, we can see on Seasons Drive, that's showing up as magenta because Seasons Drive has applied but not been selected yet. And then Dove Creek Road, some of you may be aware, I think there's some construction in progress for that street, one block over. So I suspect some of you have been to traffic calming meetings before, but if not, we'll cover everything we need to tonight. So next we're going to talk about the toolkit, but before we do that, I want to pause and just see if there's any questions from those on the phone on anything we've talked about so far. There's plenty left to cover, so if we get something that we're going to talk about, I'll let you know. But yeah, feel free to throw questions in the chat, or you're welcome to come off mute and ask the group. Either one is just fine.
I have a question. My name is Anna Stanley. Why
Sure.
is speed limits reduced to 20 miles an hour? I'm from Indiana, and a lot of the neighborhoods there have 20-mile-an-hour speed limits.
Yeah, that's a great question. So speed limit reduction is not typically something that we do in the traffic calming program, but it is something that can be a request through Hub Nashville. So if you do that, someone from NDOT will do a quick speed study for this street, and then it'll go to the Traffic and Parking Commission, I believe.
So
That's kind of, oh,
how
sorry.
do we just start something like that?
So certainly we can, but on streets where folks are already traveling in that 40-mile-an-hour range, we don't expect that simply lowering the speed limit is going to completely address the problem.
Oh, I agree.
Okay,
I agree.
I'm glad.
Some days it takes me 10 minutes to get out of my driveway.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
So there's two other questions in the chat.
Yeah, I see those and I'll go ahead and read them. So we have, will the traffic calming ensure to expand all the way to the ends of the road width to ensure cars don't go around the speed tables or bumps? The answer is yes. We can talk about that in a minute about sort of how we do that. And then question 2, does this also include Dove Creek Road? So the answer to question 2 is no. Dove Creek Road is further along in the process. So I believe there were meetings in the past. There should be a design that's been published and voted on. And if they're not out there already, I think they're about to go ahead and build this.
Okay.
So nothing we talk about here is going to slow that project down or change it really in any way.
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed to know. So Dove Creek, it has been approved. It was approved before Huntingboro, and now we're starting the Huntingboro process.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So let's jump in and talk about speed cushions. This is probably the most common tool that we use in the traffic calming program, mainly because NDOT has observed they work pretty well and are consistent with the program's goals. But for anyone who's not familiar with what these are, they're like speed bumps, but stretched way out because they have a higher target speed than speed bumps do. So speed bumps you'd sort of see in like a parking lot where we want people going 5 to 10 miles an hour. Speed cushions are elongated because we're really looking for folks to be hitting them in that 20, 25 mile an hour range. So emphasizing that the goal isn't to get people to go extremely slow over these, just near the speed limit is the goal. To address the question on width, basically, depending on how wide the road is, we'll choose different numbers across. And we try to limit the edge of the roadway, the distance between the edge and the nearest speed cushion, to less than 2, 3, 4 feet in certain cases. We find that that is one way to help prevent people from driving around these. But if it's looking like we're going to need to do some extra discouragement on that end, we can place the signs nearby to sort of help dissuade people from doing that. And then in really odd cases, we may bring out some delineators, or if there was like a bike lane or something, that'd be another place where delineators might be useful. So I think we can pretty safely cover the full width of the roadway and not leave gaps for people to drive around those cushions when we finalize this design. Similar to speed cushions are speed tables. The difference here is these stretch all the way across the road. They're a little longer as well. These are intended more for kind of higher volume roadways, I think. And there's one key benefit that these are missing that speed cushions have, and that's a reduced impact to emergency vehicles. So where speed cushions have these gaps in between them, where if I'm driving a fire truck with a really wide wheelbase, um, they're able to kind of hit these but not be affected quite as much. And then a smaller vehicle like a car or a light truck, those will pretty much have to interact with something 6 feet wide in some way. So they're not perfect by any sense, but they definitely have that benefit that speed tables lack. Um, the reason we talk about these first and use them so often in the traffic calming program is because national research and a study that NDOT themselves have performed both indicate that they work pretty well at reducing speeds. So the data we're looking at here is from the NDOT study in Nashville, kind of before and after a few traffic calming projects similar to this one were installed. And we see that the average speed came down from 31 miles an hour to 22 afterwards. And then that 85th percent speed, that measure we talked about earlier, went down from 37 to 25. So we were really pleased to see the results of that. That basically we went from speeding pretty severely before the speed cushions down to a much more reasonable speed that we sort of expect on residential roads after the installation of the speed cushions. There are a few other measures that we use to either supplement traffic calming designs or in areas where vertical measures won't work very well. We can do radar feedback signs. I think everyone's probably seen one of these before, but essentially it's just a speed limit sign and then a device that measures your speed and shows it back to you so that you can sort of compare, like, I'm supposed to be going 25, but oh, whoops, I'm actually going 40, better slow down. That's in kind of the ideal case. The main difference with these and vertical measures is that this doesn't physically affect anyone's driving. So if one had a disregard for speed limits, say, this wouldn't really do anything to prevent them from driving dangerously. Even with that being the case, we do still see an average of 6 to 7 miles an hour in speed reduction. So they don't do nothing, but they're not a tool that we rely on exclusively for traffic calming. Another thing that we might consider is narrowing. So we know that really wide roads are quite comfortable to drive fast on because you have a lot of room for error. It feels a little more like a wide open interstate or a wide country road. And that can sort of subtly induce speeding just because there's more space for you to work with. When we narrow the pavement with striping, it doesn't change the asphalt you're able to maneuver in, but it does sort of subtly indicate that the space that you're intended to be traveling is a little more claustrophobic. So it's not, a foolproof measure, but it sort of psychologically induces lower speeds than roads where they're not present. An added benefit of these is they can increase pedestrian comfort. Just by having that line there, it's sort of a subtle indication that if I'm walking on the road, I'm over here, you're over there in your car on the other side of the line. And if we both go straight, we're not going to conflict. Again, it doesn't physically do anything to protect that person, but the striping can be a safety improvement that we consider. Something we can do on really large intersections are called bulb outs. So that's where we take excess pavement in really wide turning radii and sort of shrink it down into a smaller intersection that's easier to cross and requires slower speeds to make those turning movements. So what I like to do is have you all imagine like an interstate ramp, for instance, has a really wide curve that's intended for you to go fast on, where if you were pulling into your driveway, that's a pretty tight turn and you're not able to do that very quickly. So we want people going at safe speeds when they're turning across intersections, because ultimately that's where people need to cross if they're walking as well. So it's just a spot where, we like to encourage folks to go slow if they're not already. We can also do chicanes. So this is where we take a wide road with kind of parking on either side, and we'll zigzag the center line of it to create kind of a serpentine shaped road. And that'll slow folks down by forcing them to maneuver. So it's not like a, airport runway where you hit the gas and just go straight. By doing those little turns periodically, you won't be able to go as fast if, of course, you're following the striping. The main downside of chicanes is that they limit the amount of on-street parking we have because by going all the way to one side, you can't have parking on that side and then on the other. So it's a bit of a give and take, but we do see these in Nashville from time to time. And then lastly, we have traffic circles, and these are for intersections that are really massive. And it's works sort of like bulb outs, basically just a way to kind of eat up excess space and ask vehicles to maneuver a little more as they're navigating an intersection, and therefore go slower and more safely as they're proceeding through. So that is all of the tools that we're talking about tonight. Next, we're going to review the specific design concept we have put together for Huntingboro Trail. But before we do that, I want to just pause and make sure there weren't any questions that came up about the measures we have in place. If there's anything you'd like me to repeat or dig into a little more, let me know. All right, well, sounds like we're good to go ahead and look at the concept here. So what we started with is a speed cushion based design. And what we're looking at is 4 sets between Countryway Road and Mountain View Road. These are spaced pretty deliberately to be between 200 and 300 feet from intersections where we're stopping, and then between 300 and 500 feet between each other. That is a pretty deliberate decision. Basically, that range is sort of the sweet spot where it's not so many that it's like a constant going over, but it's enough that there isn't enough space or time for people to speed back up to speeds that are unsafe, in between the sets of cushions. So Huntingboro isn't too long. We weren't able to fit in tons, but 4 is an amount that I think will make a significant difference and certainly make going really fast on Huntingboro not appealing to folks who are using it. Happy to stay on this slide as long as we need to. Feel free to ask any questions. I'd love your feedback on if there's anything you think we're missing. We are going to go and do a site visit for Huntingboro Trail. So if there's anything you think we should be looking out for when we go do that and make our site observations, this would be a great time to let us know, and we can take note of it and be sure to, keep it in mind. And then next, we're going to talk about what happens next on this this project, sort of the next steps, how we design, if there will be another meeting, how voting works, sort of all that stuff is later in the slides.
If I can make just one observation, David, thank you for your and
Sure.
us to better understand the process. Much like what happened, and I so appreciate Council and Harrell for really helping the city understand when we initially got approved for Dove Creek that it was just going to create a bigger problem on Huntington. And so now we have both those approved and they're both going in. So that's going to really be a benefit. However, we are creating a problem for Countryway, which is the road that they both feed into to go out of the country, which is that development at the end. So just want to make a point of that. We know people are cutting over from Hobson Pike through our neighborhoods, and they use those 2 roads, Dove Creek and Huntingboro Trail, but they're going back to Countryway and then going out across either Smith Springs or Anderson Road. I'm sorry, Anderson Road. So just wanted to make that note.
Yeah, understood. This is a program that is broken down by street. So certainly if there are neighboring roads that you all think would benefit from traffic calming, they're welcome to apply. We aren't able to expand the project to cover different streets. Um, and certainly it's, not outside of the realm of possibility that folks would choose a different route if they were using this one as a cut through. But really the program focuses on taking a road that we know and have observed dangerous behavior on and just slowing that down. So we're not really looking to divert a lot of traffic, but just encourage safe speeds on, the roads where it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else before we move on?
I just have a question about the mapping.
Yeah.
So is this a precise estimate for where the cushions will be placed, or is this just kind of like just a markup for right now? Like for instance, I looking at the stop sign on Mount View Road as you enter um Huntingboro Trail. So would the first one be around the first three houses as you turn off Mount View Road?
Um,
Is that
I'll answer your first question. It's
okay?
not precise, but it is like fairly accurate. Um, so what I'm noticing here is I think the furthest one to the left, that looks like it's right in front of someone's driveway. We're going to make sure that that's not the condition that we have. But we are going to try to fit in 4 because that's the best spacing that we're able to um, achieve. But when we go out there and take some measurements and then ultimately zoom in and do a more precise design, we'll adjust these as needed to um, put them in the least impactful spots. But to answer your second question, the one furthest to the right or closest to Mountain View Road, that will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 feet from the stop sign, um, unless something is surprising to us and we can't put it there for some reason.
I have a question.
Sure.
Have they observed a lessening of traffic after these are put in? Like I said, one day it took me 10 minutes to get on my driveway. The volume of cars on this street is just unbelievable.
So NDOT, I believe, is working on kind of a before and after volume study of traffic calming projects. But what I will say is that it's really challenging to apply results like that to all streets because we know that traffic behaves sort of based on how the network is laid out. So if Huntingboro Trail were like the only option to go from point A to point B, we wouldn't expect really any reduction in volume. So that's about all I'll say on that. The short answer is we don't really know for sure, but it would stand to reason that there could be reduced volume if folks are deliberately choosing Huntingboro because it's a frictionless route, for instance.
It's very convenient to go from Hobson Pike down this little street over to our street and go on over to Anderson Road. It's very convenient, so
Mhm.
it's a problem.
Got it. Well, we're not going to do anything to limit people's access to Huntingboro Trail, but we do want to make sure that anyone who's driving on Huntingboro is going a safe speed.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Another question. So in the picture, I see white poles on both sides of the street. Will we be getting those as well?
Probably not. We don't install those by default. We really only use them if we need to. So some instances where that might be necessary is if it were a bus route, for instance, and they really wanted those cushions centered in the lane so a bus doesn't have to turn around it. They're really used as ways to prevent people from driving around the cushions. but for the vast majority of installations, we're able to design it such that they're not necessary to prevent that driving around.
I have a question.
Yes.
In the event that we do not install those and we see that people are being resourceful and finding out and figuring out how to drive around, will you guys come out at a later date to install those?
Yes. Either that or we'll do some adjusting with the signs. It is something that other earlier traffic calming installations have experienced, and NDOT does take complaints through hubs seriously and enact measures to correct it. I would like to think that we've learned some good lessons since the early days of the program and can better prevent this from becoming a problem on the front end. But for cases where they do see a lot of people driving around the cushions, they'll come back and work on solving that.
You have some existing issues on the west side of Huntingboro Trail between Huntingboro Court and Seasons Drive, where people are parking commercial vehicles along the side of the street. And that may be a case where you want to put those white indicators up to avoid people trying to go around the cushions.
I'm not sure I totally understand. So people are using Huntingboro as like parallel parking? Is
Yes.
that got it?
Yes, they're parallel parking. So I think it would be wise to do a side observation of the entire length of Huntingboro Trail at various times of day so that you can see the existing parking situations that you may need to take into account.
I see. Yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye out for street parking when we go out and do our site visit. I will say that if we can avoid it, we try not to eliminate on-street parking where it's being used. Really, our primary focus is just creating a safer environment for people, and we don't really want to mess with parking as it currently exists if it can be avoided. It is something that can be brought up to NDOT other ways. Hub Nashville would be a place to report it if you believe they're parking improperly. But on 30 feet wide streets, it's not typical to have on-street parking banned.
I have a quick question, kind of in
Sure.
regards to that, because I walk through the neighborhood and I walk Huntingboro times in the morning. It's kind of scary,
Mhm.
but so when those cushions come in, and there are some cars that do park along the street, because nowadays people just have more cars, and they park along Huntingboro in front of their
Mhm.
houses and everything. When those cushions go in, will that impede them from still being able to park
No.
on the
So
road? Okay.
yeah, so speed cushions are perfectly able to be parked on, and it is
Okay.
allowed. So they're only about 3 inches high.
Okay.
So it's yeah, it won't be like it's too off kilter or anything like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. All right, well, we can go ahead and move on to kind of the next steps of the program. There will be a spot for questions of all varieties at the end, so we can certainly come back to anything else design related that you all want to talk about. But this flow chart here is sort of a timeline of a given traffic calming project. So as we talked about earlier, it starts with an application. We then do the prioritization and selection process where we collect data and rank all those streets that have applied. And then we're here at the first neighborhood meeting. So that's that red circle in the center of the screen. And that was, as you all know, advertised through mailers. And then we've given an overview of the program, the toolbox, the concept design, all that. As I've discussed before, the next step is design. So we'll do our field review and then take that information and your feedback that you give us tonight and refine our kind of final concept design. So those will be sort of construction level plans where we call out the location of these cushions down to the foot, show which signs are going where, kind of really drill into the specifics of how wide our cushion arrangement needs to be to cover the full road. And then, report some quantities and other things that'll be helpful for the construction team to put this project in. Once we finish that design, what we can do is either schedule a second neighborhood meeting to review those plans, get more feedback from you all, see if there's any adjustments that need to be made, and then we can move on to the online ballot. That second neighborhood meeting has recently become optional. So if the group would prefer, we can do our design, post the plans online, and then begin the online ballot a little bit sooner. It's totally up to you. We're more than happy to do a second neighborhood meeting. Either approach is just fine. So feel free to sort of let us know if there are any preferences one way or the other. But then after that online ballot, if the project passes with 2/3 favorable votes, it'll go into the construction queue. You'll notice that in this timeline, that is by far the longest duration. That's mainly because there's a really large backlog of traffic calming projects waiting to be built. The actual construction of a given project is only about a week. It shouldn't take very long at all once they start, but it will take a little while for a successful project to make its way to the beginning of the line and be built. I will pause and just sort of give the opportunity if anyone prefers a second meeting or prefers to not have a second meeting, feel free to either speak up or throw it in the chat. We'll try to leave this meeting with a direction one way or the other. But again,
I have a
it is up to
question.
the group. Please.
David, I have a question regarding to the construction time. So
Sure.
based off of this, you say 8 to 10 months. So the Dove Creek project is well beyond that. So is there a way that you can push this through so that they're both aligned at the same time? Because the issue that we think will happen is if we do one side before the other, then all the traffic is just going to move over a street.
Yeah.
There's not a way to expedite this project to be in line with Dove Creek. And I think with the Dove Creek Road project being in progress, that should be imminent. I will
Okay,
say,
so I will
go ahead.
circle back with you offline because
Mhm.
outside of maybe surveying, I have not seen any work done to Dove Creek.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I don't think that they're like out there now. And in the part of the program that I work in, it's sort of hard for me to like access the daily activities of those construction crews. But yeah, in all likelihood, they'll proceed at different times just because the projects began, years apart. So we wouldn't expect them to, go concurrently. Any questions about the timeline? We can go ahead and talk about the ballot mailers next, and then sort of circle back on our 1 meeting, 2 meeting decision if we'd like.
I have a question. Hi, this is Theresa Gucci again. You mentioned that, and then we would go to the balloting process. And the balloting process is the neighbors, but whatever we're defining as affected neighbors, and I guess the neighbors that are directly impacted because they live on the street, they will indicate whether they want to move forward or not? And is that the 2/3 approval, is that based on respondents or the number of people impacted?
Yeah, those are both great questions. Let me just cover those really quickly. So balloting, everyone who owns a parcel on Huntingboro Trail or has a parcel that touches Huntingboro Trail. So even if your address is Huntingboro Court, for instance, you're still included. That is the group that will receive these postcards and then submit votes. The 2/3 yes or no, that is 2/3 of those who respond. So it's not out of the whole group, but just of those that submit a response, kind of like any other election. The voting period will be open for 6 weeks. So we think that's plenty of time to get your mailers, kind of talk to your neighbors, make sure that everyone's aware of what's going on. Post on Facebook, for instance, sort of spread the word that way is always a good idea. But then ultimately the ballot period will close. We'll count the ballots, and should 2/3 of those responding be in favor of the project, it'll enter the construction queue. A couple of clarifying points about this kind of ballot zone and mailers. It's residential properties, churches, and schools each get 1 vote. Owners with multiple properties get 1 vote. So if like one person owns 5 of these lots, we would just send them the 1 postcard. Properties that are vacant are not eligible. We don't do a whole lot of like research into that. It's more just, is this like an empty lot or a house under construction? Since we're really looking for those who are like living here to be offering their feedback. And then any operating businesses like a sandwich shop, for instance, we wouldn't consider them like a residents of the road. So we would not send them a ballot postcard. Does that make sense? And do we have any other questions about this ballot zone or balloting in general?
So I have a question in regards to the ballot.
Okay.
Will you have a mock ballot that you're able to send me? That way I can canvass each of these properties.
Yeah, so we will send something that looks like this image up here. I'd be happy to send you kind of that template to access, and then yeah, we would love if folks are willing to reach out to their neighbors and make sure that they're aware that this is either coming or maybe already came. And a note on that, it's not unheard of for these to get lost. Certainly I get a lot of junk mail and am not diligent about looking at it. If you do lose your ballot with its unique ID code, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, and we can just provide you with that information. So I've got my contact information at the end of the slides. NDOT has their phone number, and yeah, we're more than happy to help people vote. We definitely know that the postcard system isn't a perfect way of reaching everyone, but it's sort of the best we can do with the resources available to us. Anything else?
I know there was another question in the chat, David, from one of our neighbors, Monica. So Monica, what I will do is I will put you in touch with David if you want to forward me your email address so you can make sure your name and address is on the list to get your postcard, because you do live on the affected road.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Any other questions? We've got some NDOT social media information and a link to their website for anyone who's curious, but I'm happy to stay on as long as necessary and answer anything that you may be wondering about.
Hey, this is Therese. I don't have any additional questions. Thank you for the information and the time.
Great. Thank you all so much for your time coming out. Really appreciate your feedback and good questions. And yeah, we'll look forward to getting this designed for you all.
All right. Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too.
And thank everyone for
David.
attending.
Thank
have
you.
a great
Appreciate
evening.
it.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. I appreciate it.